Imagine this for a moment. You're working hard, doing everything you were told growing up, saving a little from each paycheck, maybe putting some into a retirement account, hoping one day it will all be enough. Yet, no matter how disciplined you try to be, it feels like you're standing still while others around you are racing ahead. The wealthy seem to play by a different set of rules that no one ever taught you. Now, here's the truth most people don't realize. The difference between staying stuck and building real wealth often comes down to one simple trick. A trick the wealthy quietly use, while the rest of us don't. And in today's story, you're going to see exactly how that trick transformed the life of a man named David Carter. He wasn't born rich. He wasn't born into connections, trust funds, or special opportunities. He started just like many of us, buried under bills, living paycheck to paycheck, and feeling like wealth was something reserved for other people. But David's story didn't end there. Through one shift in his mindset, one realization about how the wealthy approach investing differently, he turned his entire life around. By the time you finish this video, you'll understand the exact same trick, and you'll see how you can use it too. So here's my challenge to you. Don't just watch halfway through. Stick with David's story until the very end, because the lesson he uncovered is the kind of insight that could change your financial future. David Carter grew up in a modest neighborhood. His father was a mechanic, his mother worked long shifts as a nurse. Money was always tight, but like most families, they believe in hard work and saving whatever little they could. By the time David was an adult, he had absorbed all the typical advice: cut back on luxuries, save in a bank account, and maybe dabble in the stock market if you're lucky. But deep down, David couldn't help but wonder why none of that advice seemed to actually work. Why was it that no matter how much he tried to save, the money seemed to evaporate, eaten up by unexpected bills, car repairs, or the rising cost of living? Why was it that the wealthy didn't just get richer by earning more, but seemed to have their money working for them in ways no one had ever explained to him? That question haunted him, and it's the very question that would lead him, years later, to discover the trick that separated him from those who continued to struggle. But before we get there, you need to see where his journey began. Because without understanding the frustration, the failures, and the endless cycle of financial struggle David went through, you'll never truly grasp just how powerful this trick is and why the wealthy guard it so closely. So let's go back to where it all started. David Carter, in his mid-20s, staring at a stack of bills on his kitchen table, wondering how he would ever escape the life he felt trapped in. David Carter sat at his small wooden kitchen table, the kind that wobbled if you leaned on it too hard. A stack of bills lay spread out before him: electricity, rent, his car payment, and a few credit card statements that seemed to grow fatter every month. He rubbed his temples and sighed. This wasn't the life he had imagined for himself. He had a decent job working in IT support at a mid-sized company. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid just enough to keep him afloat. Yet every month felt like running on a treadmill. No matter how hard he worked, he wasn't moving forward. What frustrated him most wasn't just the debt. It was the sense of being trapped. The harder he tried to save, the more life seemed to push back. One month, it was his car breaking down. The next, it was an unexpected medical bill. Every time he thought he was making progress, he was dragged back to zero. David would sometimes scroll through social media, seeing friends who seemed to be thriving, traveling, buying homes, investing in businesses. He couldn't help but wonder, what do they know that I don't? Like many people, David had grown up hearing the same advice on repeat: save diligently, avoid unnecessary risks, and one day, just maybe, you'll have enough for retirement. But deep down, he knew something was wrong with that plan. Saving a few dollars here, and there wasn't going to make him wealthy. In fact, at the rate he was going, it wouldn't even keep him comfortable. The turning point, or rather, the beginning of his realization, came one evening when he looked over his savings account statement. After years of trying, he had managed to put away just under $5,000. On paper, it looked like progress, but when he checked the interest earned, he nearly laughed in disbelief. It was barely $7. $7 for keeping his money locked away for months. Meanwhile, inflation was silently eating away at the value of everything he owned. Groceries cost more, gas prices rose, and rent crept higher each year. That night, it hit him like a punch to the gut. Saving isn't enough. If I keep doing this, I'll never get ahead. But what was the alternative? Every time he thought about investing, the fear set in. He remembered stories of people losing everything in the stock market, or friends who had tried to start businesses and failed miserably. He couldn't afford to lose what little he had, and so David remained stuck, trapped between the fear of risk and the reality that saving alone wasn't working. It was a cycle millions of people know all too well. Work harder, save more, watch inflation eat away at those savings, and still feel like wealth is always out of reach. This went on for years. By his early 30s, David had begun to feel defeated. The dream of financial freedom seemed farther away than ever. He wasn't careless with money. He wasn't irresponsible. He was doing everything he was supposed to do. Yet he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that the game itself was rigged, and that the wealthy were playing by rules no one had ever taught him. What David didn't know then was that his struggle wasn't unique. In fact, it was the exact struggle that has kept millions of hardworking people locked in the cycle of just getting by. And what separates those who break free from those who remain trapped comes down to one critical shift. That shift, the one investing trick the wealthy rely on, was still ahead of him. But before David discovered it, his frustration had to reach a breaking point. And that breaking point was coming faster than he realized. One rainy afternoon, David Carter sat in his office lunchroom, staring at his soggy sandwich. His co-workers were chatting about weekend plans, but he barely heard them. His mind was occupied with a simple, troubling thought. I'm working harder than ever, but I'm not moving forward. He pulled out his phone, scrolling absent-mindedly through financial articles. Most were the same recycled advice: cut out coffee, don't eat out, save more. But one headline stopped him cold. It read, "Why the rich don't save, they invest." Curious, David tapped on it. The article described how wealthy families approach money differently. Instead of focusing on cutting expenses, they focus on building assets. Instead of leaving money in a savings account, they make it work for them, compounding and growing over time. David leaned back in his chair, stunned. He realized something important. The wealthy weren't playing the same game. While he was busy trying to save pennies, they were multiplying dollars. That night, he couldn't sleep. He started digging deeper, reading about compound interest, dividends, rental income, and how investing early, even with small amounts, could snowball into something life-changing. But what really shook him was a short video he stumbled across of an older investor, a man in his 70s, who said something David would never forget. Your money is either working for you, or you're working for money. The rich understand this. That's the difference. The words echoed in David's head. Your money is either working for you, or you're working for money. It was like a light bulb went on. David realized he had been trapped in a mindset of fear. He saw investing as something risky, something reserved for people with more money than him. But what if that was the very reason he wasn't moving forward? The next day, he made a decision. No more excuses. No more waiting until someday, when he had more money to start. He would begin investing with whatever he had, even if it was just a small amount. But here's where the story takes a sharp turn. David didn't just open a basic saving-style investment account. Instead, he stumbled onto a powerful method that millionaires quietly rely on, one most ordinary people never hear about. It wasn't about timing the market. It wasn't about gambling on risky stocks. It was a simple, disciplined strategy that flipped the script, turning his limited income into a wealth-building machine. And once David started applying it, the results were undeniable. This was the moment the cycle of frustration began to break. The moment he stepped off the treadmill of just saving and onto the escalator of wealth building. What David discovered would change his life forever. And it all started with this realization. The wealthy don't work harder for money. They make money work harder for them. When David Carter finally decided to take action, it wasn't a glamorous beginning. He didn't suddenly throw thousands of dollars into the stock market. He started small, very small. With just $200 from his next paycheck, David opened a low-cost brokerage account and bought his first shares of a broad market index fund. At first, it felt anticlimactic. Nothing happened. The following week, His account balance showed $201.50. Not exactly life-changing, but David remembered the words that had sparked his turning point. Your money is either working for you or you're working for money. For the first time in his life, David's money was working, however slowly. Encouraged, he kept going. Each month, he set aside a portion of his income. Not what was left after expenses, but a fixed amount he paid himself first. It was tough. It meant skipping some dinners out and delaying buying new clothes. But David stuck with it. And then, something powerful happened. After 6 months of steady contributions, he looked at his account and realized he had invested nearly $1,500. The market had nudged it up to $1,600. It wasn't a fortune, but it was proof of concept. For once, instead of seeing his savings sit idle or disappear into bills, he saw his money growing. But David didn't stop there. He became obsessed with learning how the wealthy invested. He read biographies of self-made millionaires, studied the habits of legendary investors like Warren Buffett, and listened to podcasts during his commute. The pattern was clear. Wealth wasn't built on flashy stock picks or luck. It was built on discipline, patience, and strategy. David discovered something that truly changed the game for him. The wealthy don't just buy assets randomly. They buy cash-flowing assets. Instead of hoping to sell for a higher price, they focus on things that pay them month after month. So, David adjusted his strategy. He began investing not only in index funds, but also in dividend-paying stocks. Each quarter, he received a small deposit into his account, sometimes just a few dollars. The first time it happened, he grinned from ear to ear. It was the most passive money he had ever made. It was no longer just theory. His money was literally paying him, even while he slept. Encouraged, David took the next step. With the confidence he was building, he pooled his savings and invested in a small rental property with a friend. It wasn't in the best neighborhood, but it cash flowed. For the first time in his life, rent checks were arriving in his bank account. Suddenly, the weight of his financial frustration began to lift. He wasn't trapped in a cycle of just working and spending anymore. He was building something lasting. His perspective shifted completely. Instead of asking, "Can I afford this?" he began asking, "Will this expense take me closer to or further away from freedom?" And his habits transformed. He stopped chasing every new gadget. He stopped feeling guilty about saying no to expensive nights out. Every dollar had a purpose now, to buy him freedom. David noticed something else too. His friends were still stuck where he had once been, paycheck to paycheck, constantly stressed, constantly waiting for someday. But David was no longer waiting. He was climbing. The small snowball he had pushed off the hill months ago was gaining speed. His investments were growing, his confidence was building, and the path ahead was becoming clearer. He wasn't rich yet, not even close. But for the first time in his life, David Carter could see the possibility of financial freedom, and it was no longer just a dream. It was becoming his reality. But just as things were starting to look up, David would face a setback he didn't see coming. One mistake threatened to undo everything he had built. David Carter's financial climb had been steady and thrilling. He had finally discovered the discipline of investing, the power of dividends, and the joy of rental income. For the first time in his life, he felt in control. But success has a way of making people overconfident, and David was no exception. One evening, while scrolling through investment forums, he came across a story of a man who had turned a small investment in a new cryptocurrency into millions almost overnight. The comments were filled with people bragging about their gains, posting screenshots of their soaring account balances. David felt a familiar tug, greed mixed with fear of missing out. He remembered his slow, steady growth, and suddenly it didn't feel exciting anymore. Compared to the wild returns people claimed to be making, his cautious investments felt boring. Despite everything he had learned, David convinced himself that he could take a small risk for potentially huge rewards. So he liquidated part of his savings, nearly $15,000, and poured it into a new, untested cryptocurrency that everyone said was the next big thing. At first, it seemed like he had made the right call. Within weeks, his investment doubled. He was ecstatic. He started calculating in his head what would happen if it doubled again. But then the crash came. Seemingly overnight, the cryptocurrency's value plummeted. Forums that had once been filled with excitement were now swamped with panic and despair. David watched in disbelief as his $15,000 shrank to $5,000, then to $2,000, and finally to almost nothing. The emotional toll was heavier than the financial loss. He felt foolish, betrayed, angry at himself for ignoring the very principles that had brought him success in the first place. For days, he could hardly sleep. Every time he thought about the money he had lost, he felt sick. The worst part was that he had to face the possibility that maybe he wasn't as smart as he thought. Maybe he didn't have what it took to build real wealth. Doubt crept in like a shadow, threatening to undo the confidence he had fought so hard to build. And the ripple effect spread. Because of the money he lost, David was unable to buy a second rental property he had been eyeing. His financial progress stalled. He even considered pulling out of the stock market altogether, just to avoid the risk of losing more. For a moment, it felt like he had been thrown right back to square one, struggling, defeated, and trapped. But what David didn't realize was that this setback, painful as it was, would end up teaching him the most valuable lesson of his financial journey. A lesson that separated those who stayed wealthy from those who only got rich for a moment. David Carter sat at his kitchen table, staring at the faded numbers in his investment account. The sting of his failed crypto gamble lingered, like a bruise he couldn't stop pressing. For days, he replayed the mistake over and over in his head. The same questions haunted him. Why did I abandon my plan? Why did I chase quick money when I already knew better? Then one evening, as he was sorting through old notes from his financial journal, he came across a sentence he had scribbled months before. The wealthy don't get rich by betting on luck. They stay rich by sticking to principles. He sat back in his chair, letting the words sink in. Suddenly, it hit him. His mistake wasn't just about losing money. It was about betraying the discipline that had brought him this far. That night, David made a decision. He wasn't going to quit. He wasn't going to let one bad choice define his financial future. Instead, he would use it as a turning point. So he returned to the foundation. He studied the portfolios of real millionaires, not internet gamblers. What he found was both simple and profound. They weren't obsessing over the next hot stock or chasing get-rich-quick schemes. Instead, they had mastered what David now called the one investing trick the wealthy use. They invest consistently in assets that grow steadily over time, reinvest their earnings, and let compound interest do the heavy lifting. That was it. No magic formula, no hidden loophole, just a patient, relentless commitment to long-term growth. David recommitted himself fully. He rebuilt his portfolio, focusing again on index funds, dividend stocks, and real estate. Every time he received a dividend check, he reinvested it. Every rental payment that came in, he allocated toward another down payment. Over time, his net worth began to climb again. Slowly at first, then with surprising speed. Within a few years, he had not only recovered what he had lost, but surpassed it. But more importantly, David carried with him a new mindset. Wealth was not about speed, it was about stability. And that realization changed everything. Years later, when people asked him the secret to his success, David would smile and say, "I learned that the trick isn't really a trick at all. It's patience. Wealthy people don't just invest money, they invest time. And that's what most people are too impatient to do." He knew that was the lesson banks never wanted the average person to know. Because as long as people kept chasing credit cards, loans, and get-rich-quick traps, banks would stay rich, and the average person would stay stuck. But for those willing to play the long game, to reinvest, and to let compounding quietly build their fortune, the story could be different. And David Carter was living proof. So if you're watching this right now, ask yourself, are you chasing quick wins, or are you building something that lasts? Because the one investing trick the wealthy use isn't hidden. It's right in front of you. The question is whether you'll have the discipline to use it. If David's story resonated with you, don't just walk away inspired, walk away empowered. Start where you are, with what you have, and commit to consistent investing. It's not about timing the market, it's about time in the market. And if you want more powerful financial stories that reveal the real strategies the wealthy use, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to AI Cash Cortex, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next video. Remember, wealth isn't built overnight. It's built over time, and your journey can start today.